Piccolo Spoleto and Unedited present La Femme French Horn in an evening of chamber music dedicated to horn repertoire. They will premiere Dr. Karen Walwyn's new single, Angels 9. Karen, how does a pianist come to be commissioned to do a work for French horn?
That's a very interesting question. And let me first say that I'm extremely flattered and honored to have been asked to do such a beautiful thing. I started composing somewhere around the time of 9/11. And I found myself actually living in Barcelona, Spain. And I was only doing piano, doing recordings. I have a couple of recordings out of African American works that had not been recorded before, mostly premiere recordings. And one day I just kind of felt inspired to start to write. And ironically, though it took about 4 hours to write a measure of music, I was a little encouraged, but I kind of put it away. Went to visit my mom in Virginia, came back home to the States, and would you believe, on the day of 9/11, I was traveling to Dulles Airport. And so I was on a Greyhound bus, and as a result, I didn't know anything that was going on. When the bus arrived at Dulles Airport, everyone was trying to rush onto Greyhound bus, and I'm trying to figure out, since when did Greyhound bus become so, the first place to go to catch a ride anywhere, because it was very empty. So, of course, I'm getting off of the Greyhound bus. I go into the airport, KLM, had 2 gigantic luggage with my American products ready to go back to Spain. And I stood in front of the counter, and she didn't look at me. She kept her head down. The clerk wouldn't address me at all. And I was wondering what's wrong. I stood there for about 15 minutes. And finally she looked up and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I know I'm a little early. My flight leaves at 5. It's about 11:15. I'd like to just go ahead and check my stuff in." And so she said, she looked at me with such horror. And she said, "Don't you know what's going on? Didn't you see the bombs and the airplanes and the buildings and people falling out of buildings?" And I thought, what could have happened from last night to today? Because I had just watched CNN, turned it off, went to bed, and got on the Greyhound bus and arrived at Dulles Airport. And so as she's telling me this, I started to notice from behind, there was no one else in the airport from what I could see. And so I had to ask her, what was she talking about? And so as she starts to explain to me what she was talking about, her associate came from behind the panel, and he said, pointing to the unit next to hers, "Thank God we weren't at that desk. That desk was United." And I saw the horror in his face. And I don't know what happened, but after that, I eventually got back home to Barcelona. 6 days later, I started writing. And no more was I spending 4 hours on one measure, just started to write. And I eventually wrote my first work, which was Reflections on 9/11. It's like 57 minutes long, movements that would depict the first day and, possible emotions and thoughts and anger and questions on what and why. And so after that, I have found myself drawn to events that, if I'm in the vicinity, perhaps, I'm struck. And so Mother Emanuel came about because I happened to be in Colombia just a day before, visiting a friend. And what was so amazing about my time in Colombia, though it was unfortunate circumstances with a death in the family, I happened to actually have been in Goodwill, of all places, and just shopping, looking around, and people from all walks of life came up to me and started talking, just unsolicited, just, "Hi, how are you?" and started conversations, old, white, young, black, Spanish, everyone, just as if this was meant to happen. And so I went home, back up to Maryland, and the next day I heard what had happened, just minutes away. How could something so egregious have happened in such a beautiful place? And so I was struck by the humanity of the area, of this town, of this environment. It's so culturally beautiful and warm. And then something so horrific could happen. And so I started writing. And eventually, once Debbie and I were in contact, she asked me about, Charleston once again. And I thought, well, I'd love to have another opportunity. And so with 3 French horns and piano, yes, this was a little bit different from what I had been used to, but the opportunity was something that I absolutely loved and couldn't imagine not, trying. So I'm just so honored.
Karen, what's the difference in writing for your instrument, the piano, and being commissioned to write a work for French horn, which you don't play?
That's a very interesting question, and it's something that I had to think about. The first thing that came to mind was, what is the purpose? So I started to reflect on the history of Mother Emanuel, and I started to reflect on the types of songs that were sung in the church, in the community, and a melody started to come to mind. And so I would begin, actually not with the melody as much as the feeling. And so the feeling was created from the piano part. And so the feeling of a journey, and so the journey of slaves being brought to the United States, to Charleston, and that sort of ocean ride, if you will, is what I'm feeling in the piano part. And so from there, I start to create the melody, a melody that perhaps might be kind of familiar in its shape and its language to the people of the Mother Emanuel community. That's where I began.
Tell us the rest of the story.
What's so poignant about what happened at Mother Emanuel is that after the atrocity that would happen, the people of the church were able to immediately turn around and express forgiveness and love. And it's the same thing that Nelson Mandela did when he walked out of prison after 27 years, shook hands with the guard, and so many things that he did to bring unity to his country. For example, the national anthem that is sung now is or was his favorite piece because part of it used to be the national anthem for the Afrikaans, the white community. And so he combined it with the anthem that was sung by blacks and people of color. And so the national anthem sung now includes at least 4 languages, if not more. And so the bridging of communities is exactly what the community at Mother Emanuel did. And so in my piece, I try to somehow bring from the moments of arriving and with the unfortunate events of slavery, coming to a point where through it all we're able to come together with a sense of love. And the shooter, interestingly, I don't know if this was an intention, but in 1936, on June 17th, was the day that Hitler appointed his police chief, Heinrich Himmler, I believe his name is. And the message that that police chief had was chilling. And it was a message to instigate this idea that to follow the order, to follow obedience is how you achieve this pride. And from there, the atrocities would begin. And so I don't know if the shooter for Mother Emanuel was aware, but what a ironic coincidence. And so, again, with how this church was able to respond, I think it teaches us in the world, because it brought the light on internationally to this spot, this event. I'm hoping that my piece and all who are expressing, finding their ways of expressing the same sentiment, are able to see the bigger picture, to be able to embrace each other's differences, to be able to learn, to have an interest in learning what the other is like. So all of us can at least make an attempt to bring this large world together.
I'm Jeanette Guinn with Dr. Karen Walwyn, concert pianist, composer, and recording artist, Howard University's very first Steinway artist in residence. What does it mean to be part of the elite group of Steinway artists?
Well, I remember the moment that I had contact from Steinway and I was offered the opportunity to present my package. And it had never, ever, ever occurred to me that I might ever get that kind of call. And so upon approval, I was elated. And of course, Steinway has always been my favorite piano, so that wasn't a question. So once I was able to be a part of the community, I really felt, in a way, that a sense of validation, if you will, that I had never felt before. And so it makes me so much more critical of what I do and how I do things. And so it helps me to grow as a musician. So there is not a sense of arrival. There's a sense of now it's time to really step it up a notch.
How did your life lead you to music?
Well, both of my parents were casually musically inclined. I say that because neither had a professional career, but my grandmother on my mom's side used to play the organ. I think she actually played in church. And so she taught my mom a little bit of piano, and my father had learned trumpet. My father's from Nevis in the West Indies, and my mom is from Cumberland, Virginia. And so they would meet in New York. And so by the time that I came around, piano was already in the home, and I remember hearing music ever since I can remember any thoughts. My father used to play Bach all the time, Bach organ music all the time. And eventually, I think by the time I was 8, I remember hearing Tchaikovsky, the concerto in B flat, and it's like, okay, I gotta learn that. And so I think, even though I really didn't have a lot of piano teachers in the early days, I used to say, well, I'm gonna learn that, and I'm gonna learn this piece, I'm gonna learn. So by the time I was 15, really without much in piano lessons, I was already making my way through the concerto. And we won't say that it was fine playing, but at least I, for some reason, thought that I could give it a shot. And so ever since then, I've been working with different teachers. And so by the time that I got to college age, I was working, my first primary teacher was Rosalie Gregory, and she was actually at Broward Community College. She was a student of Ivan Davis, who was at University of Miami. And I later transferred to University of Miami, studied with Ivan Davis and with Dr. J.B. Floyd, and got my bachelor's and master's there. And then I went to University of Michigan, which is where I finished with my doctorate. So I had the opportunity to work with a number of teachers there, including Theodore Letvin, Susan Starr, Louis Nagel, Arthur Green, and Richie Atamian. I know that he has a formal name, but I can't remember. But with all of the teachers, I was able to build an understanding of an approach to piano. Plus, I did a lot of research. I was big on technique. So, for example, one of my doctoral recitals was half of the transcendentalist etudes. I don't know why. Thinking back about that now, I'm like, man, what was I trying to prove? But playing the piano seems to be my number one passion. But I'm conflicted because I really love writing, and it's a new phase. So if you asked me, would I prefer to work on the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto or write something, okay, 3 French horns and piano, I think I actually would enjoy the idea of the creation process. And then I would not wait too long before I rush back and, continue my work. So it's interesting because I hadn't ever thought about composition, to be honest.
The world premiere for Angels 9 is going to happen in Charleston this week. What is it like the very first time a piece that you've composed is presented to the audience? What does that feel like to you?
It's really amazing. And what is so special is that it's right here where this event took place. And so I am anticipating the emotions of remembering what happened just minutes away and hearing the music for the first time. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself because I had that opportunity when I wrote a work for choir to perform my Nelson Mandela work, and that was performed in North Carolina, so much far away from South Africa. But still, hearing the music that I wrote there's no words to describe that. But this is going to be an incredible moment, and I can't tell you how much I feel honored to have been asked.
Composing, performing, recording, teaching. How do you choose and balance all of that?
That's an interesting question. I have learned that making my list every day, but my list kind of goes beyond my iPhone. So I have sticky pad of things that I have to do all over my apartment. And so sometimes I'm able to actually meet some of those and be able to take it and crunch it up and throw it away. And that seems to give me some pleasure. But it's very difficult to go, because I actually am in the middle of a number of projects. I have another commission that has come my way. And so that deadline is July 31st, along with a documentary on Susan Starr. She was the first American female pianist to win an international competition, second to Van Cliburn and the Tchaikovsky. And so I have this amazing opportunity to videotape her, to learn of her, having worked with her. I mean, she's an amazing woman, an amazing pianist. I'm doing that this summer. I'm supposed to be finishing up my Florence Price edits because I just recorded music that was recently discovered, which had been abandoned for 30 years. And so Florence Price is the composer that I'm now championing, if you will. I'm hoping that recording will come out by the end of the summer. So I don't know. I just follow my list, tear the pieces of paper off and throw it out and try it again the next day.
You talked about your teachers. You're a teacher now. How important is music education, and why is it important?
I think it's extremely important because music education, whether the student comes in and actually successfully achieves a career as a performing musician or not, the process is what's important. And if nothing else, it teaches how to become a good student for life. I am a student of music for life. And so the way I teach, I'm hoping that I'm giving the skills so that these students will be able to continue life however it is that they choose, whether it's in music or not. And I have to think like that because music is a dying world. And so live music, compared to all of the other music that takes place right now. So we're not getting as many piano majors across the country. And so we're not, as a whole, when I was a student, my teachers had 20 to 22 students in their studios. Now we're lucky if 3 to 5 are in our studios. And so it's shifting greatly. So I am forced to teach in a way that still you're keeping music alive, classical music in particular, trying to at least teach the language of music, but also the skills to survive as a young adult. So sometimes my piano lessons are not at the piano because we have to talk about so many other things. So when I go home, I will feel good if I have actually learned something myself. And that helps me teach the next day.
When you write, do you think about the effect on the audience? And what are you hoping will happen for the audience of Angels 9?
Such an important question. Yes, when I'm writing, my hope is that I am communicating a desire for the audience to leave with a message of, I don't mean to sound corny, but it's just very simple. A message of love, forgiveness, and unity. And so I hope that as I write, I will always be able to just somehow get that message through, no matter the circumstance. I'm hopeful that with Angels 9, not only will we be reminded of the events, but along with that, we can look forward to being able to get to know our neighbors and to have an interest and to help fight, if you will, just those little steps. When the lesson for me was when I was in Goodwill and people just started saying, "Hi, how are you?" We need to do that more often and get to know what's so different and not be afraid of it, but say, okay, that's nice to know. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me. I hope that comes through in Angels 9.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.
I'm Jeanette Guinn with Steinway artist Dr. Karen Walwyn, whose work will be premiered this week in Charleston.